all about education, scouting, building patterns, and being successful on public land in a do-it-yourself style hunt. A huge thanks to all of our partners, including Bowtech Archery, Diamond Archery, Excalibur Crossbows, Vortex Optics, Ford Trucks, Slumberjack, Bass Pro Shops of Denver, Mr. Heater, Turkey Creek Studios, Ripcord Rest, Tight Spot Quivers, and Black Gold Sights. Join us every Monday night live at 7 p.m. Pacific on the Bowtech Archery or Nate Zelinsky Facebook pages, bowtecharchery.com, and or the Nate Zelinsky YouTube channel. And remember, tag and share this live feed with your friends and bring your big game questions. And here's your host, Nate Zelinsky. One time there, so just give us a second. We'll be going live as we always do. All right, guys, welcome. I am Nate Zelinsky here. I am with Mr. Scott Murdoch, Wildlife Officer. Guys, we have a great show for you tonight. As always, we always are talking about education, preaching, knowledge of the resource, whether that resource is the land, the animals, or really conjunction of everything put together. Education is what makes success. That's why guides are so successful, is because they have all of that knowledge. So as we go forth, it's all about that knowledge. We've been practicing this since May with all of our scouting, and tonight we're taking it one step further. So again, I want to introduce my guest. Scott, thanks so much for coming in.
Of course, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So as a wildlife officer, we're going to talk about what we've been doing this week, but the main things, just so everybody can kind of get settled in here, we talk about scouting, and I'm a freak about it. I get in the woods in May and start watching my animals, but as your job, you spend a lot of time outside, and you really watch the whole gamut. You watch from the first time as an animal grows it, whether it's a whitetail, a muley, an elk, and you watch them potentially go to harvest in a hunting situation or drop their sheds in spring. I mean, you literally see these animals on a 365-day cycle, which helps you build that knowledge of where they're at, what they do. So that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to be talking about what happens to animals throughout the course of the hunting season. So we're going to talk to you about what the animals are doing, where they're at, things like that. We're going to talk to you about, wildlife things. As far as like conservation efforts go, we're going to talk to you about wildlife laws and regulations. So guys, we have got a great show for you real quick. Now, before we go on, we always talk about last week's hunt. Last week we were talking about youth hunting. A great friend of ours, John Bruckner, I had the privilege of spending the weekend with him and his son doing some elk hunting. Now, over the weekend, you actually had a great weekend.
It was fantastic weekend. One of the few weekends I was able to take off, believe it or not.
We're going to talk about it here in just a second. But we went out. We had that same storm that you were in. Snow, wind. And unfortunately, it drove all of our animals off of all the open country. Unfortunately, we're hunting a unit that has just steep embankments everywhere. When the animals are on top of all these knolls and stuff, they're very approachable. It's a great gun hunt. But the second you get wind driving them in the timber, there's no meadows, there's no drainage to hunt. They're out or they're in. And unfortunately, with all that weather, they were in. So we spent a lot of time with young Jonathan hiking. This 12-year-old kid, we probably hiked 14 miles, 12, I don't know what it was. We hiked forever and ever and ever, and he was a trooper. We just kept asking him, hey, you want to go? And he's like, man, I want to get an elk. Let's just keep going. We hiked and hiked and hiked. We were not successful this weekend. We'll be joining him again in the next couple days, so make sure you follow up with that. The second we get some opportunity with that, we will definitely keep you updated. But we made it all about the youth. So again, we took time. We sat and threw rocks on the ice and ate as many gummy bears as I could handle above tree line and everything like that. So it was all about hanging out with the youth and making it fun for them. Now, before we get into your job as a wildlife officer, one of the biggest things, we have a relationship. I always call you with questions and regulations and everything else that we do. Things like this. People ask us on these live feeds if they have questions. Like I'm sure right now, if you guys have questions, make sure you send them in tonight. We'll do our best to answer them. But people ask me questions, and I always feed off of you, and I ask you. And I have the most respect for you as a wildlife officer because not only do you work in the field, but you also are an avid hunter yourself. And there's so many people that, whether they're so involved in the wildlife industry that they tend to shy away from it, but you still are an avid hunter. And I think that's huge to have that relationship. You know how the hunters feel. You understand both sides of that, and that really helps out. And we're going to throw to a clip here real quick of how Scott spent his weekend this past weekend in some terrible, terrible weather. Right there. Again, if you're on Instagram, jump over. Right now, we'll keep this clip up for just a second. So jump over. Now, Scott, that is a tremendous bull. I mean, great front, seconds, thirds. I mean, whale tail on the top. That's awesome. Now, real quick, guys, I want to hear this. I know that you had extreme extreme hunt. We'll just put it that way.
Yep.
Tell me about that hunt this weekend. How did this all play? The weather was horrible. I mean, windy and snowy.
windy. I guess that was kind of the name of the game this weekend. We don't often, as game wardens or wildlife officers, get out as much as we would like. Yeah. But, I had done my scouting. I had located animals. Unfortunately, the animals that I had found, there were guys on that, I guess, Friday. And so my game plan totally changed. And there was several people in on these other animals, tromping through the bedding areas and all these things. And so, unfortunately, I had to kind of adapt. And luckily, I had a backup plan. I had some other elk located, went up into this drainage, ended up finding these elk up above tree line the night before the season. Went in there and actually spent 2 nights in a bivy sack. The first night, Friday night.
I can't imagine that. Talk about miserable weather in a bivy sack.
Oh, it was
dedication.
It was not pleasant, but when you're way back in, I mean, you got to be there before first light.
Oh yeah.
Sometimes that's some of the things that you have to do, and unfortunately, the snow was in there so hard that next morning, I mean, you couldn't see anything. Yeah. Nothing was above tree line. The winds were howling. Kind of went to my third plan, if you will, and started tracking. And I got on one group elk and started tracking, ended up cutting some lion tracks on that, got off of that track, and then found the highway of elk that was associated with the group that I found that Friday night. And ended up tracking them most of the morning and found that group, found the bull, bumped them. And, the wind swirling, the situation was not right. And like Nate was saying before, these elk, in a lot of these areas, it's either thick, dark timber or it's a meadow or tree line. I mean, there's no in between. In this area, was that. And you couldn't shoot more than 30, 40, 50 yards in a lot of places.
And when they're in a big herd, that's tough.
Totally, and you may only see the edge of the herd, and so you may only see the couple cows hanging on the edge. That bull may be either on the other side of the herd or in the middle, bedded down or something, and so you just have to get lucky when you get up to their beds. And so I just kept pushing, and I ended up following these elk for 6-7 miles, and every once in a while the bull would bugle, and so I knew I was on the right herd, and it just didn't work out that day, and ended up putting them to bed, and ended up going back in the next morning, and ended up finding this group bedded kind of on the calm side of the hill. I mean, everywhere else was blowing 50, 60 miles an hour. I mean, it was just brutal. And, they had found this kind of spot where they were a little bit more safe, protected, and he was bedded out, at tree line, and, got in range and sealed the deal. So
started packing out.
Lots of packing out. Yep.
That's awesome, guys. We're going to talk more about that because I think one of the most underutilized opportunity is following a track out. Mm-hmm. I see hunters all the time that come up on a track in the snow and they look at it and they're like, oh, there's some tracks. And then they're like, that's great that they're here. And they walk on. They might look at the direction and think that, but very few hunters literally put like a hound dog nose in snow and walk it out. And it's, as long as you have the physical ability, it's probably one of the most successful ways to do it. And the biggest thing is, it's a combination of watching with your bare eyes and watching the binoculars and making sure that you are aware of how close you can get. Because, a lot of times that situation leads to very close encounters. But luckily you have snow. Usually you're quiet. Mm-hmm. As long as you can play the wind. Following out a track is an unbelievable opportunity to put down an animal. Especially as we're starting to enter, that later October, a lot of these hunts, whether it's Pennsylvania whitetail, wherever we're at. Mm-hmm. Following tracks is going to be a huge thing, whether even you're following to put them down and hunt them, or just using it as a scouting trick, finding, big bucks, things like that. A lot of our nighttime hunters, the people that are, again, in the Midwest, instead of putting out 100 trail cameras on every opportunity, every time it snows, go out and see where the tracks are, see where the animals are crossing around. You can learn a lot from that snow. So, guys, again, all that, and congratulations. That's a heck of a bull. Throw that up there one more time, Devin. Let's check that out. Again, 2 nights in a bivy sack, long hunts, long hikes, but he got it done. And that's the biggest thing, is staying prepared. And we're going to talk about that, staying mentally in the game. It's so easy to give up 50, 60 mile an hour winds, and especially when Mother Nature gives you the excuse to back out. I think that's the biggest thing. We all when conditions are right and when it's calm, nice, it's hard for us to quit because we don't have an excuse. That's just who. I mean, I'm not saying we all make excuses, but I'm a fisherman. You know what I mean? If I have the excuse to blame Mother Nature, I'm like, I'm out.
Yep.
So it's windy, blowing 60. It's easy to pull off, go back to the cabin, go back to the hotel, go back to camp. But you can stick with it, and a lot of times sticking with it can pay off, especially when everybody else is struggling. Take the small opportunities and make the most of them. So guys, we're going to jump on things. Again, bring your questions, guys. Tonight is a night for questions. So if you have questions regarding anything, bring them tonight, especially anything, again, for our officer here. We would love to hear that. But we're going to talk about a couple things here real quick. First thing we want to talk about, this is the big question that we always get, is what happens to the animals throughout the season. So let's just say we took out hunting and we took out people. Obviously, you have natural migrations and habits to where you have a pre-rut, or let's say a summer pattern, a pre-rut, a rut, and a post-rut for elk. And you have the same thing for muley, same thing for mule deer. You have your bears getting ready for hibernation. Every animal has their cycles, and obviously that changes behavior, and you, the hunter, have to anticipate that. Then you throw in the hunting mix. Everything we preach is public land. We would love the opportunity to be a private land hunter. A lot of our viewers sometimes have that access. Most of the stuff you hunt, that I hunt, most stuff that we're preaching about is something that every single person out there can do. We call it, we're the regular Joes. I mean, we're purchasing our tags. Half the time we're over the counter or no points. We're not saving up for years and years. We're trying to hunt every year and make the most of those tags. So with that, we're hunting public land. I mean, I parked in a parking lot on Saturday morning with 8 other vehicles. Because it's just what it is. And we still made a great hunt out of it. If we didn't have 100-mile-an-hour winds, we were on elk just because we're willing to push a little further, a little harder than everybody else. But with that said, I want to talk to you, somebody who's in the field almost on a daily basis, watching animals. What's the biggest impact that hunters have that changes things? Do the animals push deeper in the woods, or do they just turn nocturnal, or what happens to the daily migrations of animals as hunting season starts, and especially archery season versus rifle season? What all of that has have an effect on animals?
Yeah, I mean, there's a variety of different things that those animals will do, and they'll respond differently in different areas. I mean, where I patrol, I've got a lot of urban areas, so we've got deer and elk, and really to hang out in town and in subdivisions, and really have no real change in behavior in and around the people. But then you've got other populations that tend to be much more remote and act much differently than some of these other animals. And one of the biggest things that I preach to hunters that call me or talk to me and say, what can I do to find these animals? The biggest thing is try and figure out what are these animals going to do, okay? Most of the time, those animals are going to respond to the pressure by going to areas that they don't get pushed to, right? So each time a hunter goes into the woods and bumps a deer or bumps an elk, that animal is going to move into somewhere where it feels safe. And then once it's stayed there long enough, it may move or migrate or go back into different areas. And if it doesn't get bumped again, maybe it'll reside in that particular area. But if it continues to get bumped over and over and over, it's going to move completely.
Remotely.
Yep. And deer obviously respond much shorter distances. They'll flee shorter distances. Elk, they may go 2, 3, 4 miles sometimes, clear into 2 or 3 different drainages away from wherever the hunters may be. Sometimes you'll see them go nocturnal. But more than anything, I see them move into areas that are unpressured when they're just not getting disturbed. One of the things that I see a lot with the hunters is, they'll hunt in areas that are real commonly or heavily used by the public. And it may be hikers, it may be hunters, it may be, other recreationists.
Photographers, everything.
All kinds of things.
Yep.
And those are areas that if it was me as a hunter, those would be spots that I would probably avoid. Yep. And so if I've never, ever hunted a unit, I can get a pretty good idea of where those animals are going to be by just looking at the overlay of roads.
Yeah, parking lots, the whole deal.
And I generally won't hunt within a half a mile or a mile of any road. And I can more or less eliminate a lot of country. Not saying that there's not elk or deer close to roads, but especially
to amplify
elk,
your odds.
especially elk. If you can get 1, 2, 3, 4 miles back in, or further in some cases, you can kind of beat the road hunters, and you can also hunt those animals when they're acting a little bit more normal.
Natural behavior. Yep.
Exactly.
Definitely. So with that being said, talking about that opportunity, again, the animals are going to migrate. Everything's different. I agree 100%. We saw a lot of stuff, especially with the elk rut, I would say. That's probably the biggest thing that I see the change. If I'm in an area with less pressure, even if it's a couple hunters, if these hunters are educated and they're communicating, calling, bugling to these animals when they're naturally bugling, it doesn't have an effect. But if you go out to an area where you have a lot of hunters and you're bugling at the elk and they're not even close to bugling yet, if the elk aren't talking, you shouldn't be talking. But hunters will do that. And I see a lot of times where the elk won't hardly even move. They'll stay in their normal habits, but they'll just shut down. So these animals will bugle naturally in the wild from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. But any sides of that, early in the morning, they're just literally shut down just to not communicate because they know it's dangerous. And I've seen the effects of that type thing that hunters would have on these animals. So I think all situations they'll act differently, especially in the areas. If they only this one spot has good food, water, bedding, they tend to stay longer. If there's ample opportunities for that food, bedding, water, obviously they're a little more example to flee if they can. So that's great. Now we're talking about that. Talking about avoiding the crowds. We always talk about what you see, because we'll even make jokes and laugh. I'm like, oh man, what's the best hunting story you've seen today? And you see everything, and everything is. Some hunters are lazy, and I don't want to, again, I'm saying this to you guys. I don't want to call you out, but I mean, a lot of times you get out of a hunt what you put into a hunt. So there's people that never want to leave their vehicle, and if you're driving around with a spotting scope and you're glassing 5 miles, sometimes that's literally the best way to find animals. I can't tell you how many times I literally stay in my Ford, and I got my spotting scope on the window, and everybody sees me like, man, is he road hunting? Really, I'm looking 15 miles away, and practically in another unit. And there's some people that are in a truck looking 50 yards off the highway. But you see a lot of things that can help or hurt success rates. We talk about scouting, how people hurt themselves during scouting. I mean, the best thing I saw that first rifle hunt. So I'm literally sitting here, I'm glassing animals, and I'm watching these guys set up their camp. And we've been glassing elk for a month, 2 months now, getting prepared for this first rifle season. That Jared that you guys saw last week, that big 6 he killed. And we're watching another area these guys setting up, and they got a beautiful camp set up, and there's literally elk, I don't know, maybe a half mile from their camp. And I'm like, man, those guys are in a great spot. They're gonna pound those elk in the morning. And I'm sitting there, and all of a sudden I start hearing the shooting. And they're sighting in their rifles. From hunting camp, and I'm just like, and Wisconsin made that illegal in a lot of different areas. So like before that first rifle hunt in Wisconsin, and some of the other Midwest states are doing that. They're making it illegal to target practice the day before hunting season, just because they know what it does to the animals. And obviously this guy's not quite prepared, sighting his rifle from camp, and other guys have been looking forward to this for 9 months, and they're very serious, and it can hurt each other's hunts. So, but I want to talk about that. What are some things that people can avoid that hurts their success? I mean, as you see hunters, the successful and the non-successful, as a hunter yourself, what are the big mistakes that you see almost on a daily basis?
I think there's a number of different things that folks do. One of the more common things is guys will get up into an area, maybe they've never been up into there, and they'll get in there 3 or 4 days before the season, and they'll drive around, which is good. You want to get to know the area and figure out the lay of the land and that type of thing. But they'll hike, 5 or 10 miles, and they'll burn out all their time and energy before the season and bump all the animals that would have been there. And then by the time opening season comes, they may hunt part of the day or the first part of the day.
Calves are burning, don't want to wake up.
and they've kind of, they've burned themselves out before hunting season really gets going. And more than anything with hunting season, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And so you want to be patient. If you really want to stay within your limits, and if you just hike 3 or 4 miles, if maybe that's all you can do, or maybe it's just a mile, or maybe it's 15 miles, it's whatever works for you. But if you just need to stay out every single day that you can, and just be persistent. So a lot of guys, it's kind of clockwork. Every Saturday morning of opening season, everybody's out there, everybody's gung-ho, and then Sunday morning, everybody sleeps in, and they're gone by the time the Broncos start.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, that opening morning, those animals don't really act as normal as they would have been. They may get bumped. You may get, an unexpected hunter come into the spot where you were planning on, and maybe it messes up your hunt for the day. But it certainly shouldn't ruin your hunt for the whole season, because it's amazing how much, you get to Thursday or Friday of the season and you go up there and there's no hunters around.
Nobody.
And
animals are back to natural behavior.
Exactly.
How you've been scouting them.
You can pattern them again, and you can get back on those animals and really go after them. And so just be patient. Just stay in the groove, and just be diligent in going out. And as much as it is no fun getting up at 4 a.m, get up at 4 a.m, get out in the field, and just
hunt hard every day. Scott and I are the very same way, as 90% of our successes came in the last minutes of the last day. I mean, it's just what it is. I mean, I can literally look back at the 200 animals I've been a part of from my guiding days and now my personal hunts. I don't ever remember an elk even halfway through the season opening success. I mean, I literally, out of the 18 bulls I've killed, like here in Colorado, for example, I don't remember any of them even being remotely in the beginning of the season. I mean, most of them are either last day or last 2-3 days. It's just what it is. You just have to grind through it. That's just how I'm built. I have to grind through it. It's, I'm not granted the luck of a kill unless it's been to that final second. But one thing I want to talk about when you're talking about bumping those animals, we talked a lot about this in the beginning of the season. We were talking May, June, through our scouting. We talked about this, and I think one of the biggest things that is a misconception. Everybody is telling themselves, and this is going to vary portion of the state or the country that you're in. Again, we're doing a lot of stuff here, Colorado, Wyoming, Utah. But wherever you're at, everybody is like, it's October now. It's colder. So these animals are staying up longer, which, I mean, I've seen some situations where, like western half of Colorado, I've seen these animals out in the open and feeding late in the day, 10, 11. All the bulls that I'm watching right now, these animals that I'm, persistently on, checking, watching, I haven't had a bull out in the open longer than 8 a.m. since probably June. I mean, it's October. The other day I was out and it was, whatever Saturday was, 12 degrees. And these animals still bedded down. They're still nocturnal. They're still very active at night, whether they're feeding at night or, still breeding cows in some situations, in a rut situation at night, or just walking around to stay warm. I'm still seeing my animals bed down at 8 a.m. Now, if you're lucky, you're cold enough to where they'll bed down in the open. So they might bed down in a pasture. They might bed down in a meadow. They might bed down above tree line. A lot of times we're seeing these animals bed down in aspens. We really consider that a November pattern, but a lot of times, the animals will bed down on an open hillside, but still where they have some cover around them to make them feel safe. But regardless, the reason I talk about this, you the hunter, I'm like pointing at you right there. How many of you know exactly when your animals bed down? The reason I ask that is I know exactly when the animals I'm hunting bed down to the minute. I know, again, I haven't seen one bed down or stay up later than 8 a.m. So when I am out physically in the field, so when I'm scouting, when I'm out hunting, the second 8 a.m. comes around, I immediately go on guard. I immediately get to that point where I'm like, all right, they're bedded down. How do I get to my truck? How do I get to camp? Or how do I, if I'm going to stay up in the woods all day, where can I go before I ruin a hunt? Because everybody hunts until their time is to stop, whether that's 8 a.m. or 10 a.m. And then people literally disregard. All of a sudden the wind switches and they're like, oh, I'm done for the morning. But they don't realize what their wind's doing or how their exit out of the woods affects the animals that we're hunting. They're like, oh, I'm not actually pursuing them, so I'm just going to back out. And half the time these people are back out, their wind's going up and down canyons, they're pushing animals, and again, you're not successful because your patterns are getting ruined. So I say that because as you go forth in these next seasons, as we hunt the next 2 months, I think about those bedding times. So when I'm out there scouting, when it's the day before the season I'm scouting, I know exactly, hey, I have got to be in a safe place, whether that's on top of a mountain, down in a drainage, or back at camp or my vehicle or wherever I need to be by a certain time to not disturb these animals. Because people don't know that. I mean, you see it every day. Guys will be out scouting and, I'm sitting on top of a ridge, my wind's safe, and at 10 a.m., 11 a.m., everybody's like, man, I only got a week off of work. I got to make the most of it. And they're just traipsing through the forest and just, no idea. And they're blowing animals out 3/4 of a mile ahead of them. Just from that lack of knowledge. And I think that's one of the biggest things is just ask yourself that simple question. When do my animals bed down? When do they get back up? Those simple little questions of building that pattern, if nothing else through scouting, you think about when they bed and when they get back up, that's going to give you a great idea of your daily habits, where you have to be, what time do I still need to start in the morning? What time do I have to back out? What time do I need to be in a position in the afternoon to make the most of those hunts? But more importantly, hunting defensively and not ruin anything. Most times, a hunt is ruined by us, by pushing the envelope. That animal just went over the hill. I know he's in his bed. Let's go after him. Instead of saying, you know what? He's going to come back out this afternoon. Let's just chill. Yep. Everybody pushes the envelope. Again, we get too excited. Oh, it's a bull of a lifetime. It's a buck of a whatever. We all push our envelope with everything. We push it with scouting. We push it with the actual hunt. We push it with shooting, and we wound stuff. Everybody gets too excited, and they push the envelope. As where if you just back off, think of the situation, a lot of times hunting that defensively is going to create more opportunities and better opportunities by hunting that defense. So just think about that. Think about when your animal's bed. That's going to help a lot of time. Again, guys, bring your questions. If you got your questions, bring them. We're going to do one more topic here real quick. What we got, Scott, here. We want to talk. So I have a hunt coming up. I'm going to South Dakota. I've actually never big game hunted in South Dakota. This is my first South Dakota hunt. And I'm going through the booklets. I'm reading all the questions on the internet, and it's massive. I'm a new hunter to a new state, and I have, I want to make sure everything's in par wildlife related. I want to make sure I'm a smart hunter. Nothing ruins a hunt more than a violation. So I'm preparing for that, and I want to talk about what you see on the common mistakes. Obviously, there's a million things you could do wrong to violate a law in a certain state that you're big game hunting in. But there's a lot of things that are very simple that a lot of times get neglected, and that's just from people assuming things. Like the first thing I want to talk about is evidence of sex. Every state's going to have their law on what's considered evidence of sex and how the meat and the game has to be prepared for. But like in Colorado, I'd love for you to walk us through that because I see it on a daily basis. We pull into Steve's meat market, and I'm waiting in line, and I'm looking ahead of me, and I'm like, man, that doesn't look right. And then you sit, and you could drive by camp, and the deer's hanging in the tree, and I'm like, that doesn't look right either. So again, let's talk about that law first, about evidence of sex and how that should be handled by the hunter.
So one of the things, the wildlife officers in Colorado are a great resource, really anywhere in the country. Hunters. Feel free to give us a call. I'd be more than willing to volunteer my time to talk with, various hunters. Obviously, midway through the season's probably not the time to do that. But, I don't have any problem talking with hunters, about spots and locations and questions regarding laws, whatever you need. And that's around the country, and that's what I would recommend Nate do with South Dakota is talk with some of those officers and really get the details and the nuances to those laws.
Yep. And you're serious about that. I talk to game wardens all across Utah, Colorado. There's times where I'm just like, hey, and again, I do this in May, June, July. I'm like, hey, I'm planning a September hunt in the area that you're at. I have a week to hunt. The season's 30 days long. When would you suggest I come out? All these people are willing to talk to you. You can't call them Friday night at 6 p.m. before Saturday start. People get mad. They're like, man, I called him. He never called me back. I'm like, when'd you call? And they're like, Saturday morning? Yep. That type of stuff doesn't happen. But most times, if you have that respect for the officer and you ask these questions, again, you're available. That's a part of the gig. Yep. I think, again, nobody takes advantage of the officers in their area. So think about that. You can usually get a hold of them, and it's a great resource to know that. So. Yep,
absolutely. And especially guys with real high preference points tags, stuff like that, we get more calls. But even for over the counter licenses or just say run of the mill licenses, it's surprising how few calls I get from hunters, and I'd be more than willing to help folks out, if they called.
There's the number to the office.
Perfect. Right on the screen, guys. There's the number to the Colorado Parks and Wildlife. Again, that's how you get a hold of your local manager for your particular area and get your questions answered for sure.
You know, regarding some of the more common violations that we see, I mean, obviously as a hunter, I know how amped up you can get when you're in the moment and you're like, oh shoot, it's been 10 minutes. I haven't even voided my carcass tag. Yeah. I need to make sure that I retain evidence of sex. I need to do all these basic things in order to validate my kill.
Yep.
And so, you know, as a hunter, I'm able to empathize with other hunters. And so, you know, when I'm sitting a mile away and I'm watching a hunter go through the process of killing an animal and taking photographs and high-fiving and starting to cut and doing all this stuff, you know, I can put myself into that person's shoes. You know, some of the basics. When it comes to evidence of sex, more is always better, right? So if you can get that animal out whole, make sure you retain the head as well as the sexual organs, right? So now we've got 2 pieces of evidence of sex that counts, so that, you know, if it is a buck and you end up cutting the head off later, or you take the head in for CWD testing, you didn't just cut your only source of...
Because once the head is detached, it doesn't count. Correct. I think that's the biggest thing, is everybody still quarters it and they're like, I got the head.
Yep.
If it's not attached, it doesn't count.
Correct. So in Colorado, evidence of sex has got to be naturally attached. And there's some confusion when it comes to that, of like, well, I've got it in a bag, does that count? No, that does not count, right? So we've got to be able to tell for sure that this chunk of meat came from the sex animal that you shot. And so I've had situations where people have shot the wrong sex and tried to get away with it. And so obviously we've got laws for a reason.
Yeah.
You know, when you're doing when you're quartering animals out, generally things have two sets, right?
Yep.
So leave one on one side, one on the other. That way, if you accidentally make a mistake and cut one off here, you've got a backup on the other side or the other quarter.
And that's the first thing I do. That's kind of the general thought process is animals down, fill out the tag. Mm-hmm. Number one thing. It's just, I always put my camera with the tag. That's the thought process. Yep. Take out the camera and the tag, fill out the tag, get it properly attached. And then the big thing, like in Colorado, tag has to be on meat. Or
correct.
Attached. I mean, your thought process there. Again, everybody sees it right here. Every hunter, right, you see it in the photos, and you see the tag duct taped to the antlers.
Correct.
Not in Colorado. Some states that's allowed. Colorado's not. So I put that on the meat, and then when I'm quartering that animal up, always do evidence of sex, at least one portion on the first cut. Everybody skins out that back leg, and they're like, oh, I'm going to leave it on the next side. That's how things get forgotten. Make that priority. Put that on the first tag, and then to make it simple, unlike you, I always put my tag on that leg with evidence of sex. So as I have an animal quartered up, I have a rear hind quarter with, you know, again, a sexual organ right there with the tag right there. So it's one easy step. Here's my tag, and read the tag. Here's my, here's a piece of meat. Here's the evidence of sex. Cleaner is always better. Again, I hate it when I see guys, I see it with your guys' job all the time, you know, I'm talking to you and you're checking somebody and they're like, oh yeah, the tag's in there attached to something, and, you know, they would expect you to go dig in and pile in for it, and again, working together is helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, the last thing we want to do is go through every bit of meat and pieces and parts. I mean, you know, if you can keep your meat organized and neat and clean, one, it's going to be a better result for you in taste.
Yep.
And two, it's going to be much simpler if we do stop you. And so we do traffic stops, and we stop people on highways when they're moving back and forth. We stop people on back roads. And routinely we'll see, you know, a cooler full of meat. Maybe it's boned out meat. And we've got to dig through and try and find which piece of meat has the evidence of sex. It's much simpler if you keep that carcass tag. You know, game bags are a great item to have. I usually carry 10 or 15 of them in my truck just to have. And, you know, evidence of sex, the carcass tag's attached. There's some specifics on how you, you know, actually void your carcass tag we can talk about. But having all of that together really simplifies, you know, one, our job. Obviously, you know, your worry's not mine. But you know, it'll certainly speed up the process rather than having us have to go through and kind of delay your afternoon or whatever.
Definitely.
When it comes to your actual carcass tag, the biggest thing we see is folks don't tear that actual carcass tag off away from their license. So if you tear that off and then physically notch out the sex.
Not a pin. Notch.
Yep. So on the instructions it says notch, the date, the month, and the sex of that animal. So there's 3 things that you have to notch, and then you've also got a sign. Okay. So again, we see a lot of folks will forget their pen, and then they'll get back to the truck and sign. Certainly, make sure that you do that all completely, and then attach that to the meat. You'll be good.
Perfect. Awesome. That's, again, a huge help. And again, I think so many people can get even a negative tone to their wildlife officer, and they're like, man, what's he hassling for? I'm just trying to hunt. And, I mean, so many times it's because things are created a hassle, but generally speaking, it's never on your side of the hassle. You're just doing your job. It's us that aren't prepared. So, again, making it prepared makes it a great situation for everybody. I was going to keep that in mind. The other thing I want to talk about real quick, especially for call-up. Yep.
Quick question on evidence of sex. Is male more important than female, or are they equally important?
They're equally important. Really, I mean, it's got to be with whatever goes to your license. I mean, we have a specific quota for the licenses, and so making sure that a male goes with the male license and a female goes with the female license is really important, because when those ratios are skewed, it really affects how we manage. I mean, ultimately, we're using hunting as a management tool to harvest does or bucks or whatever the case may be, depending on the management goals for that area.
So even on either sex tag, it still is very important. I think that's the biggest portion of that question. It's either sex. People are like, it's either sex. I'm good either way. Still very much matters. And state to state, this is something that it's a hard question to ask because every state's different. But you get into the situation of antlered females of whatever option, and then certain size antlers, and if the antlers are below a certain size, does that count towards either sex? And that's where we really say go to your state for that. And that's where it can get into some funky gray area of what's what.
Well, and so in Colorado, in a lot of our elk units, we've got a 4-point restriction. So it's got to either have a 4 points on one side or a 5-inch brow tine, right? So you've got to be able to prove that the elk that you took met that requirement. So you're actually required as well to make sure that you bring that head out on that animal. I've only ran into this situation once where a person didn't bring the head out. Of course, they said, well, it wasn't a very big animal or something. Turns out it was a spike. So, when you see those types of things, there's usually a reason for that. With the either sex tags, I mean, retaining evidence of sex, it may be a male, but you've also got to prove one step further that it met that antler requirement.
Yeah. What if a deer is, let's say a little mule deer buck, little whitetail buck has 3-inch horns?
In Colorado, if you shoot anything with 5-inch antlers or less, it's considered a doe or an antlerless license. And generally, I mean, think about it. I mean, if you're hunting, I mean, certainly we don't have folks. The intent is not to have folks intentionally taking those animals, because your license is for a female, right? And so we want to have, looking at our ratios, we want to have harvests on females for a reason. But as you know, especially with our mule deer, what do we have? 6-8-inch ears. And they very easily could cover up 2 or 3 or 4-inch tall antlers. And so that's kind of a, gives the benefit of the doubt to the hunter that if they do shoot and walk up and they go, oh shoot, there's 2 or 3-inch antlers, that's person still covered. Okay. So now if you shoot something that's got 8-inch antlers on a doe license, you should probably call us, right? And so we deal with these types of situations all the time, and that's, as a hunter, I can see how that happens pretty commonly. And so, call us. We deal with that situation all the time. It's a situation where you don't keep the animal, but it's a pretty minor deal in the long run.
And again, don't cover anything up. Communication with your officer is absolutely huge. One other thing I want to talk about here before we kind of wrap it up is the situation of orange. Now, everything, again, I bring this up. Guys, this is a big Colorado thing. I know for everybody that's outside of Colorado right now, this might become redundant with some of our Colorado laws, but that's where we're going to talk about the Colorado officers. So we're going to talk about some of those details. Orange, during these rifle seasons, I get it. Orange isn't my color. It doesn't quite bring out my eyes. I have a hard time finding the new pink. But again, I wear it. Even though I look like a pumpkin and I hate it, I do it. It's safety and it's a law. I can't tell you how many hunters I saw not wearing orange. They wear it at the truck, they go a quarter mile, and they take it off. Things like this become a hazard for other hunters. They become a wildlife violation, a ticketable offense. So again, knowing those things, and I think regardless of your feelings on it, it's all about conservation. Everything is a united partnership working together. Again, the more we all work together, the more everything works together, the more tags, the better habitat. It's unbelievable how even the smallest things kind of, again, turn into a negative effect and everything kind of goes downhill. So, again, working together is huge. So, with that, like Colorado law, let's talk about orange. What do you got to wear and what's legal? Like, can I wear camo?
So you cannot wear
What's
camo
the thoughts on
orange.
that?
I mean, really, I mean, the orange, came up years ago, and it was because we had a number of hunting accidents in Colorado and really across the country. And so orange was put into place, and the number of hunting accidents along with hunter education courses have reduced the number of incidences, right? And so hunter orange is intended to keep you safe, right? Animals, elk, deer, they see in colors in gray, right? And so they're going to catch movement and smell well before they can tell. They could care less whether you're wearing camo or orange or any of that. I've hunted and I've worn blue jeans before. I've plenty of times I've just had a regular T-shirt on. You're wearing orange. I mean, it's
part of the deal. We've called bulls in wearing orange to 5 feet. So again, it's not a deal, but
it
just
is what it is.
And camo orange does not count.
Camo orange
Gotta
doesn't
be
count.
Solid blaze orange.
The mesh orange technically is legal, although I will tell you, at long distances, when you're looking at it, it does become difficult to see. It kind of takes the background color or whatever you're wearing in. And it's like, to me, why would I risk my own safety for something that really doesn't matter, because the animals are picking up movement and they're picking up scent well before they can tell what color you're wearing. So, I mean, that's kind of the basics. And so, wear the orange, wear a head covering, and then the full vest. So, I tend to put orange on my backpack as well.
I was just going to ask that. That was a big question we get on this live feed a lot. If I'm wearing an orange vest, but I still have a backpack on, is that still legal? I mean, we always put orange on our backpack for safety for the concern. What's about legality?
So again, I would go back, you can look in the reg book and see what the rules are specifically. It doesn't say anything about covering that over, but you're required to wear orange, and you want it to be seen from all sides. Okay, think about the intent. What is the intent behind it? I mean, we're not trying to make it so we can see you. It's totally for you to not get shot by anybody else. So, I mean, that's kind of the basics.
Absolutely, guys. We're going to take a couple more questions, guys. We're going to wrap it up.
We've got a question regarding the blaze orange. If you're hunting with a friend or a spouse, are you required, if you do not have a tag, to wear orange?
You are not required. I suggest folks to wear it, at least some sort of orange, because, believe it or not, most of our hunting accidents that occur in Colorado are not between one individual and a complete stranger. Usually it's between either they're self-inflicted or the accidents occur between one individual and their hunting partner. Most of the time it happens in and around vehicles or some sort of loaded firearm issue. But again, we have issues where folks may mistake their partner for game, and it's a lot simpler to wear even something as minimal as an orange hat in BC.
Just to keep it safe. Definitely.
Excellent. We're good on questions.
Absolutely, guys. All right, perfect. Now, guys, again, I think the big things we want to focus on here. Number one, scouting and education pays off. You are a very successful hunter. You live in and amongst the animals practically with your career. The more knowledge you have of the animals, everything becomes easier. It's easier to predict their daily habits when things go wrong. I think that's the biggest thing that somebody like yourself or even me spend a lot of time in the woods. When something goes awry, I immediately know the backup plan. Hey, they just blew out of here. I know they're going to go to X, Y, and Z because I have that scouting. I know that animals, I know their daily habits. They're just going to do those daily habits in another area. So again, it all comes back to scouting. Whether you've been scouting since May or you're going to start tomorrow to hunt for an upcoming, or to scout for an upcoming hunt 3 days from now. Scouting and education pays off. Knowledge of the resource. And this is everything. This is a part of the resource. When we say knowledge of the resource, it can be, again, knowing the public versus private. It can know the parking areas. It's knowing the animals, knowing the daily habits. It's knowing the laws. Literally being fluent through your entire hunt is what's going to make for a successful hunt. So keep that in mind for sure. And then lastly, without any questions, make sure that you know that you can, generally speaking, call your wildlife agent. Whether it's in Colorado and you're going to speak to an individual officer in the area that you're hunting, or you're talking to somebody in an office or a biologist, again, every state that I've ever been to, most of the western states, Minnesota, Wisconsin, I've always been able to talk to some sort of officer that's been willing to help. So again, it's a resource out there that is a major tool. These guys know the property, they know the land, they know the animals, they know the rut situations, and a lot of times you can highly increase somebody's hunt over the course of a 5-minute phone call or a 10-minute phone call. I can't tell you how many times I've looked at a map on the hood of your truck, being like, man, I didn't even think about that drainage, Yep. Again, keep that in mind. These guys are out here for you. They're out here, again, they're your officer. So keep that in mind. They can highly increase your hunt. Now, real quick, I got one more thing to talk about here. Right behind the cameras, facing behind you, is Devin Menino. You guys hear about him a lot, producing the show. Great friend of mine. He has been behind the camera since May doing all of this stuff. He actually picked up a different tag. So in Colorado, there's a new system where tags that get turned in. So, hey, I can't hunt, I got to go out of town for work. Hey, my wife's pregnant, we're having a kid, whatever. Tags that are 5 points or less get rolled back into to a reissue tag. Devin picked up a reissue tag for a great unit. Literally, we've had a whopping 5 days, I think, to plan for Devin's hunt. Devin was just in Michigan. He's behind the cameras here. He came back tonight just to do the show. But we're going to go in the field tomorrow on his hunt. I was able to sneak out this morning real quick. I really just want to see how much snow this particular unit that he drew had in it. And we found some bulls. Devin, can we throw out a clip of those bulls?
I don't have them.
Don't have them. All right.
Sorry.
All right, no worries, guys. So we missed that clip there. But, guys, we have bull. I spent one day in the woods today. I found a 5x7, found a big 6x6. I found a couple other bulls that we'll be pursuing in the morning. So, again, we didn't do near as much scouting as we'd like to, but I still got that one day in. And that's all it is, to answer a few questions. I know where a couple animals are. More importantly, I scouted the wind today, so I know exactly what the thermals are doing. I know where some rough ideas of the animals are. I know where some of the bedding grounds are, which should make us highly successful tomorrow. So we'll see. Obviously, we have some wind coming in. We have a major storm coming in Thursday night, so we'll see as that plays. But we'll be out in the woods with Devin here in the next couple days. We'll also be out with our good friend and youth hunter, Jonathan. So, guys, we'll have all that stuff for you next week. And, again, share this with your friends. Tell your buddies. We'd love to, grow this show, build the education, hopefully make everybody more successful through the course of the hunting season. So, guys, next week, we're going to be joined actually by a senior bow hunter, a person actually spent the first portion of his career helping design bows and working with Fred Bear. So really individual on that. We're going to be talking about the hunts that we're having this week. So hopefully we'll have some animals on the ground and some footage of those hunts. So again, make sure you join us live every single Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Pacific. We'll be here. Bring your questions. And thank you so much for watching, guys. Also, huge thanks to Bowtech Archery for letting us go live on their page. We appreciate it. We'll see you next week.